everything we do from a business perspective is always influenced by the human or the family perspective. And Ted is really good at identifying maybe some concepts or key ways that we can work through some of those situations, and is available actually today, but also on an ongoing basis for farm families, and very specific in that. So we're very fortunate to have him. We're very glad that you're here today with us. So Ted, if you would come forward, we appreciate it. Look forward to what you have to share.
Hello. Mental health is something that people, as soon as they hear it, they think mental illness. So that's something I usually start off almost every presentation with, talking about the fact that mental health is supposed to be mental health. Mental illness is not something I deal with. So how do we get healthier? Well, one of the things that we need to really focus on is, on farms, everything stayed the same forever, 1,000 years. Dad was in charge of the farm, and he'd always tell his son that the reason he was passing on the farm was because it was time for him to take over the farm, when the truth is he passed on the farm because he physically couldn't do it anymore. So what happens? Can they do it now? Yep. And so Dad's 60 and still saying he's going to pass on the farm, 70, 80, sometimes older than that. And then there's son, now he's 60, and his kids are 30, and there's 3-generation farms, and those kinds of things have never happened before. So because of that, we have all kinds of issues with communication between 3 different generations. Now, more often than not, the youngest has gone to school. Why did they go to school? To learn more about agriculture. Who said they should go to school to learn more about agriculture? Parents. So they get done, they come home, they start telling their family, their dad, their grandfather, this is how I think we should do it. This is what I've learned, to which their dad and grandfather don't listen to a word, because they're still just a kid. So what happens? They get disgruntled, they get angry, they get uncomfortable. So time goes on and things don't get better. The most difficult place for a lot of people is the middle one, the dad, because it was an automatic that dad got the farm. Well, it's not anymore. Because if grandpa works until he's 85, how old is the son then? And so it's getting to the point now where more often and more often they skip a generation of who's going to take over the farm, which can definitely make dad uncomfortable. Because all of us hear constantly about that concept of who is in charge. Now, grandpa is the owner of the farm, so who's in charge? Grandpa. Now, who wants to be in charge? Everybody. Have you ever seen a farmer that didn't want to be in charge of the farm? And if you did, what kind of farmers were they? So everybody wants to be in charge, right? Anybody disagree with that? Everybody wants to be in charge. And why do they want to be in charge? Because they have ideas about what's best. How do we best run our farm? Well, if I have an opinion on how I should run the farm, and I'm the youngest, nobody listens. If I'm dad, I tell my dad, and I tell my son, and grandpa still has all the power. So I feel pretty powerless as the dad, which is very uncomfortable. That, to me, is by far the most difficult place to be, the middle one. So what do? Well, oftentimes when I get called into mediations for farms, the reason I get called in is because when they're talking about transferring the farm, you have all of these philosophies. If there are 5 kids, and you have a farm that's, say, 1,000 acres, and dad and mom say, I want to be fair. Sounds good, doesn't it? I want to be fair. Fair is a 4-letter word. If I want to be fair and I want it to be a family farm, how much can I divide 1,000 acres to keep it still a farm? What do you think? How many ways can I divide it and keep it going as a farm? Can't. Not possible, is it? Because if the land is worth, let's say, $7,000, $8,000 an acre, and if you sell it all, it's $7 or $8 million, well then, how exactly are you going to divide it? If you divide it by 5, no farm. Because how much money do you make on the farm? How much money do you need to keep the farm going? So you can't do it. So the idea of fair being divide by is not possible, is it? So dad and mom have to make a decision. Do they want to keep it a family farm? Or do they want to move on? And if they want to keep it a family farm, they have to make a tough decision. So when they call me in, the reason they call me in is because mom and dad would rather die before they make a decision. So they say, next year, we're going to talk about this. Next year, I'm going to fix this. Next year, we're going to, and then all of a sudden, they die. And then all hell breaks loose, and I don't know if there's any lawyers in the room, but if there are, you're a very rich man because of that one situation. Because if mom and dad don't make the decision, all hell breaks loose, and lawyers make a ton of money. So, do I not like lawyers? No, I don't very much. Some are okay, but lots of them are just greedy. Now, it's legal what they do, so can't say much beyond that, but I can say that it destroys families when mom and dad don't make that decision, and if mom and dad won't make that decision, you need to, as family members, either get them to do that or accept the fact that this will never go well, ever. And remember, it's not because mom and dad are bad guys. It's because they do want to be fair. And it isn't possible to keep it a family farm and divide it by anything. So then the other new solution, or a solution that a lot of people have come up with, is life insurance. Hey, we get a big life insurance policy on dad, and that'll then all work out. What's the problem with that one? Anybody? What's the problem with that one? Doesn't somebody have to die? What if dad lives to be 100? And it's not unusual that people live to be 90. That's not at all unusual. So just at what point, I would hope that all of you are familiar with how those insurance policies work. The older you get, the more expensive it is. So imagine what it costs you per month to pay for somebody who's 80. So if that sounds like a good solution, you better figure out a way to have your parents pass off pretty soon, because that's the only way that that's going to work on a lot of cases. So that can be a decent solution temporary-wise, but to look at that long-term, remember, people have to die in order for that to happen, and we're living longer and longer and longer. So that becomes another major issue. Something else I want to talk about is how women on the farm have changed everything. Now, what happened when it came to women coming on the farm and started being a viable part? What was the one thing that they now have that didn't exist before, up until probably 30 years ago?
A job?
They have a job off the farm, that's one. But they have an opinion. Now, before, what do you have an opinion on? How much does a John Deere cost? I don't know. How big do you need? I don't know. Do you need a new one? I don't know. Do you need a John Deere? I don't know. Now, why do you have to get that? Why can't you? Because a lot of women do the books. If they do the books, they have an opinion. If they have an opinion, oftentimes that can create a lot of chaos. Right? Why are the women shaking their head more than the guys? So with that comes a lot more issues. You know, for everybody in here that's over 50, when you harvested, you had 3 or 4 awesome meals. The women would go out and bring these great meals. Everybody was thrilled to death. The guys, that's what they look forward to all day long, the meals, all day long. Now McDonald's has a line 5 miles because women are working. Now, that brings up another issue. Women working off the farm, what happens when women work off the farm? What happens? You know, when I first started working with farms, that was in '93, the divorce rate on farms was far lower than it was in cities. Now it's exactly the same. Why do you suppose that is?
Money. Women are making money in their job. They have their own money. Or they
Yeah.
make a decision because of money. Because they make money.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Another,
Family dynamics.
what's that?
Break down the family dynamics.
It definitely breaks down the family dynamics. What happens when, now, some of you are old enough to remember when you had every meal together as a family on the farm. And as a matter of fact, it was like, if 30 years ago I had been standing in front of a group like this and I had said, you know, how many of you have all your meals together? They'd have looked at each other like, what a stupid question is that? And everybody would raise their hands. Now, I'd say the odds are really good that not one person in this room can say that they have 3 meals a day, every day, with their family. Not even going to bother to ask because can't imagine it being true. So, what then happens with communication? When do we talk to our spouses? When we eat. Used to be. So now if we don't eat with them nearly as often, obviously we don't talk nearly as often. Which also brings in our children. Now, I hear a lot about child labor laws and all those things as far as kids working off the farm and working on the farm and doing chores and how unfair that is and how kids in the cities don't have to do that, but kids on the farm have all these chores and everything. Let me ask this, how many of you did chores growing up on the farm? How many of you liked it? How many of you are proud of the fact that you did them? Okay. So, why are our kids any different? Why do our kids not need to do chores? The fact is, if you're working out in the barn and your kids aren't working out there with you, when is it that you talk to them? How do dads and sons have relationships on a farm, working together? If they're not working together, when do they see each other? When do they talk to each other? How do they talk to each other? If daughters aren't there helping, same thing. How do you get to know each other if you're not working together? Because the best of my knowledge, most farms don't have that much downtime to where they can say, all right, today we'll just talk. Haven't seen one yet that did that, but. So how do we develop our bonds with our kids if they're not helping us? And every one of you enthusiastically raised their hand when I said, how many of you feel proud about the fact that you did chores? Every one of you. Now some of you and said, did you do chores? I was like, yeah. But when I said, were you proud of the fact that you did them? You all raised your hand enthusiastically. Because How do you learn a work ethic? Is work ethic a philosophy? If I said work ethic is important, would that make you good workers? To the best of my knowledge, the only way to develop a work ethic is to work. And if we want our kids to have a good work ethic, then they need to work too. So this idea that somehow somebody is going to touch them on the forehead and they will become great workers is a bad one. It's not going to happen. So how do we do it? First of all, understand that chores and so on are a daily part of every farm, and everybody should be included, as it always has been. And you're not doing something bad to them. They hear from their classmates and so on how they didn't have to do this or they didn't have to do that. Well, good for them. They don't live on a farm. That's how a farm is run. And if it is a family farm, then everybody needs to be involved, don't they? How can it be a family farm if the whole family isn't doing something? So work ethic is created by work. The reason so many places like to hire people when they hear they were farmers is because they automatically assume they have a good work ethic, because how would they have been farmers if they didn't? So I see farms now where the 75-year-old dad milks twice a day and the son doesn't because he doesn't want to. And I actually worked with a farm a little while ago where the father gave his entire farm to his son, 200 cows, and I think 400 acres, about that. And after a year, he had to come back to the farm because the son hired out one milking a day and wouldn't work on the weekends. So dad had to move back to the farm to keep the farm going. Now, that's 40-hour-a-week jobs are not farm jobs, are they? When farmers start working, they usually identify, how much do I need to get done today? And if it takes them 6 hours, they're in la-la land and they get something else done. But if it takes them 12 hours, so be it, they just work longer. You know, if they were hoping for 10 and it's 12, they don't say, time to quit. And people understand that on farms. That is how they've always been. So let's talk a little bit about how then do you find time as a group, as a family. Now, it used to be Sunday. That was the key, and for a lot of people it still is. But now with everything that's going on, with all the sports activities and everything else that's going on, the wife working off the farm and so on, how do you find time to be together as a family? And the answer is, you stop saying, when I get caught up. Because I have never met a farmer in my life that said, yep, I'm caught up. Have you? Anybody know of a farmer that said, yeah, I got nothing to do. I'm good. So all of these promises about when we get caught up, we will be doing these things. Good luck. So remember, time scheduled, we can schedule time as a family just as well as time to do chores and time to do everything else. And if you don't think it's important, you'll find out how important it is later. Back in the day, nobody ever thought about that because everybody was automatically doing things together all the time. So it was never talked about. Well, now that's not the case anymore, and it needs to be talked about, because if you don't, bad things happen. Now let's get back to the idea of women on the farm and working off the farm. One of the big problems for males is if they've always worked on the farm, what they see is you have a job, you get it done, this is what you love to do, and you do it. I would rather work 12 hours a day, anytime I would rather work 12 hours a day at a job I want to do than 8 hours a day at a job I don't. So a lot of women work off the farm for reasons like insurance, help pay the bills. Those aren't really fun ideas, are they? That sound like a great thing? So if I'm a farmer, I set up my schedule because it's what I need to do to maintain what I love to do, which is farm. If I'm a woman and I have to go off, I get ready, I go to the place I work, I spend my 8 hours a day there, and they're talking about all the things they can do when they get home. And you're thinking, I gotta go back to the farm. And all of a sudden, I've gotta totally switch my personality and become a farmer. And how do I do that? And how is that easy? Answer, it's very hard. And if men don't understand that, then the rift or the space between them and the communication gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So we need to understand that this is a big sacrifice women are making oftentimes to work off the farm. And they're doing it for the sake of the farm, even if they're not working on the farm. They're doing it for the sake of the farm. I can't imagine most people saying, I'm going to go to work so I can pay off a bill for the farm and I get nothing in return. The only place I know of that does that is on the farm. And that is a huge sacrifice. So how do we hear our spouses when they talk about those things and what their needs are and how they need to do something? It isn't easy, but remember, farming is nothing like it used to be. Nothing. For 1,000 years, everything stayed pretty much the same. Now, how many of you have to lift something more than 50 pounds on your farm? Couple. Used to be everything. I mean, everything was lifting. So, again, what we were talking about earlier, people can farm longer, and also there's no reason women can't take over farms now. Why not? The physical challenge isn't anything like it used to be. So they can. The only reason women haven't started taking over the farms more is because it's always been a male-dominated job because it was too physically difficult for women to do it. So now those things are changing, and you will see changes on the farm as generations go from farm to farm. It's going to change. Now, when we talk about communication, anybody in here think that men and women talk the same way? Huh? So, when we communicate and how we communicate, everybody always talks about what the person is saying. You know, listen to me. Are you listening? And the answer is always, I have something to say, instead of, yes, I'm listening. The most important part of communication is listening to what the other person has to say and making sure that it's fair. Now, fair means I have a right to my opinion, but you don't have to agree with it. Somehow we have gotten to this place where if I disagree, I have to fight you. I have to argue with you. Why? I can say, okay, that's your opinion. Here's my opinion. We're on two sides here. What do we do with that? Instead of, we're always going to be on these two different sides because we'll never come to a conclusion because you're wrong, I'm right. Being right and wrong in those conversations have nothing to do with anything. Men and women communicating is actually kind of humorous because when I do couples counseling, more often than not, if the husband has 4 PhDs and she struggled to get her GED, when they start talking about their emotions, the guy just slides in his chair further and further down, and she's talking like crazy about all the things that are wrong. What do you suppose that is? You think men don't have emotions? Why are the women saying, yes, they don't? We express ourselves differently, and men are never taught to talk about how they feel. Feeling is supposed to be a gentler sex concept. But if that's true, then how do we explain all the emotions that we go through? There's so many different kinds of things that we really don't understand, and some of them are really simple. One of the examples I like to use oftentimes is, all of you know what an introvert is and an extrovert? Yeah? Okay, let me show you something. Okay, now this is the absolute middle. Means you're not an introvert, you're not an extrovert, you're right in the middle someplace. Where would you put yourself?
Which is which way?
Okay, this is extrovert, this is introvert.
Probably more 20% towards the extrovert.
So you're right here, extrovert, okay. All right, how about you? Okay, an extrovert is somebody who loves to be around people all the time, loves to just...
Definitely on the way other side.
Okay. So, way other side. About a 20, that's way other side. All right. You guys know each other? That's good. Where are you? So you're more of an extrovert, but not more. Oh, over here. Okay. All right.
I'll go to the 10% introvert, go way on the right.
Okay.
Yeah, right there. Probably at 40 there, right next to the middle.
Extrovert or introvert side? Introvert. Okay.
40 left side. On the left side, extrovert.
Take 30 on the extrovert side.
You can plug the dead center and we'll switch it.
I think I can probably put you about here. Okay, how about you?
Like a 40 extrovert.
40. Okay,
Probably 30 introvert.
30
30 introvert, probably.
introvert. Okay.
I'm big time extrovert.
10 introvert.
No, you're not. 10 introvert?
Say 50.
Dell is right in the middle.
I never have that control.
Okay, so why is that important? You know, people always talk about introvert, you know. I guess the easiest way for me to help people identify whether they're an introvert or an extrovert is if you go to a party where you know everybody and you like everybody and you're not uncomfortable at all, and you have a good time, and then you come home and an extrovert says, I'm going to bed, and an introvert has to stay up and unwind for a while. So that's a good way for you to know whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, okay? Now, why is that significant? Doesn't matter, right? Why is it significant? Because if I am here and I want to communicate with this person, we are not going to do well. Because we don't understand each other. Now, who did something wrong? Nobody. Who should something? Not the way it works. The best we can do, if we're that different, is say, we are really different. And knowing we're really different, we have to talk to each other in a way that says, I get it. I know that that's where you are. Not, by the way, I get it and I like that that's where you are, just that I know. So, if we have people who are in this area, which I think I described as Dell, why is that a good place to be? Because I can talk to this person pretty well, and I can talk to this person pretty well. Because I'm someplace close to the middle. And if I'm here, same thing. So all of these people can communicate pretty well with anybody. But if we're on extremes, much, much, much more difficult. So knowing that makes it a lot easier, because then when I'm talking to somebody that I know is truly an introvert, I'm not offended. Now, I worked with a couple a few years back, several years now. He was an incredible extrovert. He was a member of the Knights of Columbus. He was bowling, he golfed, he was on the Chamber of Commerce, and he was gone every night. And his wife was truly an introvert. And her belief was staying at home was the right place to be, and that was what a good person was, staying at home. So they had been married for about 7 years and had 3 kids. And he was never home, and his honest belief was that if I'm never home, it's for the betterment. I mean, I'm not at the bar. I mean, he could explain why he was gone. And they were good causes and so on. And why can't somebody golf every now and then? He works all day. And he saw himself as being the good guy. She saw him as, how could you possibly love me and never be home? How is that possible? And his belief was, I'm proving what a family man I am by being a member of these organizations that help the community. So he 100% believed that. They were on the verge of divorce when they came in. And the key to that was, one was an introvert, one was an extrovert. So the solution I gave them was he got to go out 3 nights a week. And when he came home, she would say, did you have fun? Blah, 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 all those things. He got to choose those 3 nights, never 4. And if he wanted to change it, it would be he'd have to drop something to have a 3rd night. Now, she had to be positive with him on those 3 nights that he would come home and be thankful that he was home those 4 nights. He, on the other hand, would have to do things with the kids, do things with the family, be part of that, and have his 3 nights out. So, were either one of them happy? No. Both of them were a whole lot happier, though, because happy for either one of them would have been stay home all the time or go all the time. So finding a way, and the reason it was important that they understood the introvert-extrovert part was it wasn't that he was against her, or he didn't love her, or he didn't love his kids. And it wasn't that she wanted to control him and never let him go anywhere. That make sense? So once they understood that it wasn't that they were against each other, it was that they were simply different personalities, then they were more open to find solutions. So just those simple little things in personalities can create all kinds of things. So anybody have any questions so far?
I'm one of those women that works out the farm and then has to switch hats and go home and farm at night.
Yep.
How do I help my spouse to understand what I'm going through when I have to switch hats?
Well, I would guess he doesn't, because how can he? And what you need to do is when you go home, explain to him what it is that your day is like and make sure he listens, because the tendency is when people talk, no matter what that person is saying, the other person is waiting for them to shut up so they can throw something in there. And so what you need to do is say, you need to hear me through. And one of the things that I do with couples, and I do it all the time, is I have them write down what the other person said. Now, the key to writing down what the other person said is not did they hear it, it's did they hear what I said. Because if I say 5 things, my importance level is going to be different. Those 5 things are going to have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I am not the same personality as you, the things that I don't think are important, I'm not going to even write down. So if I didn't write it down, obviously I didn't think it was that important. And again, that doesn't make the person a bad guy. It just simply means didn't do it, didn't think it, didn't feel it. So they have to get back to that, and when you communicate those things and you say, okay, it is really important to me that you're home at 5 o'clock when you say you're going to be home at 5 o'clock. That really does bother me, and you didn't have it on the list. 99% of the times they'll say, well, I heard you. You know, I heard that. But what they heard was, oh yeah, that's just one of the complaints you have, instead of, that's something that bothers me and that's something that we need to address. So to get your husband to understand what it's like to work off the farm, he needs to hear your day, not his identification of what your day is. And if you have to repeat yourself 50 times like he's a first grader, do it. Now, remember, I didn't say he'd like it.
No, I understand that one too.
But remember, you know, we unfortunately we're always looking at the bad guy, good guy stuff. You know, like who's right, who's wrong. You know, it's like if he says this and she says that, we pick sides. Well, that's just not how the world works. You know, I do the best I can, and it doesn't mean my wife doesn't get mad at me. Boy, does that not mean my wife doesn't get mad at me. So we are just plain different. And it's okay to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it normal for in a husband-wife relationship for the wife to try and change the husband's mind, or the mind, but the husband kind of makes a decision? Is that weird?
It's not weird at all. It's just that it doesn't need to be gender specific, because both genders do the same thing. And oftentimes it's because we think it's logical. You know, why wouldn't you blah, blah, blah? You know, that just makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense to you, how do I explain to you that it doesn't make sense? You know, if we eliminate that concept of right and wrong, then we can have a really healthy conversation about whatever it is. And most of the time, the reason we do that is we have this philosophy of right. And if I'm right, you have to be wrong. And the fact is, on almost all emotional things, just because I'm right doesn't mean you're not right too, even if it's not even close to the same. Emotions are by far the most complex thing on the planet. There's nothing more complex than emotions, nothing. And we are always trying to simplify emotions. You know, how do you feel? Good. You know, how's your day? Okay. Everything is half words, one word. And the fact is, well, let me show you. That was a good move. That was a better move. All right. This is what's called a flat affect, What that means is you're dead. You have no emotion whatsoever. You're dead. Okay. So here's the healthiest people in the world. This is the healthiest. Okay? Now, that means on a Monday, for absolutely no reason, I'm in a better mood than on Tuesday, for absolutely no reason. Now, every one of us goes through that. Every one of us. When we're adolescents and we look in the mirror and we're going to a party, and on one Friday night we look and we say, yeah. And then the next Friday we look and we go, dear God. Why? Because we swing and we swing for no reason. Now that's healthy. All of you know what bipolar is? Okay. Here's what bipolars do. Okay? Now, why is that significant? With bipolar people, I hear this all the time. Why don't they take their meds? You know, if they take their meds, they might not be able to, but they can do this. So why don't they take their meds? Why do you think they don't take their meds?
Because the highs are really high.
Exactly. You notice that this is our high, this is their high, and when they're on meds, they can't get up there. So they don't worry about this low. They're thinking, how come I never get up here? And if I stop taking my meds, I'll be able to do this. You know, this is oftentimes suicidal, but this is absolute bliss for no reason whatsoever. So that is why people have these mood swings and why it's so difficult for people to take meds when they have them. Excuse me. So, in talking about mood swings, now we have the normal emotions that go back and forth. How many of you feel that you feel very deeply? Easily hurt? I do, I am. Now, again, people who have shallow emotions are CEOs, big business owners, bankers. Because they don't get hurt. If you're in a relationship where you can hurt your spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend, but they can't hurt you, you have all the power in that house, all of it. Now, how that works is if I feel really deeply down here, then I'm more intuitive. I care more about what's going on in my life and the life of others. I have all of those positive things. And also, I feel like I'm an absolute wreck when anything goes wrong. Now, the fact is, the more sensitive you are, the more difficulty you will have with relationships. Because if you can get hurt and they can't, they have all the power. Gender has nothing to do with it. Nothing. So, when you're in relationships, when you're dating, when you're looking for someone, you're far better off having somebody that's somewhere in here with you, someplace close to you, relatively. Because it's a good thing to be able to hurt the other person and to be hurt yourself. Because then we can understand each other better and we can work through things better. If I don't know why that hurt you, it's pretty hard to go through that process. So understand that emotions have a whole lot to do with how our relationships go. And we look at the positive things of having those deep emotions, but there's just as many negatives as positives to having deep emotions. Okay. Anything you'd like me to cover? I am.
Question, kind of a lot topic, but when you think about the situation we are now with the commodity prices and so on, you think whether you're beginning or an experienced farmer, what are some of the things that kind of creep up on you when you're doing this that you don't necessarily know what's happening?
That's a good question. One of the things that we tend to do is focus on the things we can't do anything about. And none of us have any more energy than we have. So if we use all our energy on things we can't do, we have no energy left for the things we can. So one of the things you need to focus on is, what can I do in whatever situation you're in? What can I do? And focus on that first. When you're in situations that are difficult, then you go to people that you trust. Like, I trust Brad well enough to tease him. Now, that is a strong trust, because if I didn't trust him, I wouldn't tease him. So, do I trust Brad? Absolutely. Would I go to Brad if I had a question, and do I believe that he would answer that question fairly? Yes. Would he have my solutions? Well, I don't know. But I would go to him. Now, to me, that is a big, big factor, because so many people throw out this rhetoric that, well, using bankers as an example, there are a lot of bankers that will say, nah, we can't do it. Why don't you try another bank? And the reason they're saying, why don't you try another bank, is because they just don't want to tell you no, because they don't want you mad at them. They'd rather have the next bank be mad. And so they're wasting your time when they do that. So what you need is bankers who will be honest with you. And honesty is a tough thing. It's easy to be honest when you want to hear it. It's not so easy to be honest when people don't want to hear it. And yet, you need to know where you are. So honesty is hard. Honesty on farms. Most people say, yeah, well, the most honest people I've ever known were farmers. It's like, yeah, let me think. Feed salesman comes into your property, and you have a 10-year-old son, and you tell your 10-year-old son to tell him you're busy because you don't want to talk to him. That's not honest. Farmers are honest with the ways that they're honest. But remember, and I got to tell you this, farmers are weird. Farmers are weird. Dairy farmers are crazy. All farmers are weird. It doesn't make sense what farmers do or why they do it, except that they love the land and they love to farm. That's the only thing that makes sense. So when people try to make you justify why you do what you do, don't try. Just say, we love the land. Because anytime you try to explain it, it'll never come out the way a non-farmer will understand it. Never. So you farm because you love what you do. And that's a plenty good reason. Yeah, my time is up. So I thank you for listening, and take care.